The Kanem-Bornu Empire first emerged around 9th century in the lands between Lake Chad and Bahr el Chazar in the Kanem region of present-day Chad Republic. It eventually conquered and annexed regions into present-day Nigeria, Niger, Libya, Cameroon, Sudan, and Algeria. It was an extensive empire, located on important trade routes stretching north into Libya and Egypt, west towards Mali and Hausaland, and east into Sudan. This trade route is what is now called the Trans-Saharan trade route. Kanem-Bornu was by far the largest and oldest empire on the continent of Africa. The truth about Africa from Africans. It is believed that the empire began with the Duguwa dynasty in about 700 AD and centered its capital in Njimi. Its rulers were called Mayor or Sultan. It is not clear what its religious makeup was at the time, but the empire adopted Islam in the 11th century. The tenets of Islam further strengthened the moral fiber and discipline of the empire, which was reflected in its administration and its military. With Islam came the Safawa dynasty, and after extensive internal conflict, the ruling dynasty shifted westward to Ngazagamu, founding the Bornu era. The continued progression of the Sahara further influenced the migration of the Kanembu to the more fertile lands of Bornu. The Safawa, however, still resided in Njimi, the original capital. Unlike many kingdoms that rose and fell within centuries, Kanem-Bornu endured. It survived dynastic strife, inversions, and shifting trade patterns, remaining influential for over a millennium, a feat few states anywhere in the world can match. But the empire's endurance rested not on chance. It thrived because of two great pillars: its administrative genius and its military machine. At the head of the Kanem-Bornu system was the Sultan. To his people, he was both temporal ruler and spiritual guardian, ruling by what seemed like divine right. The Mayor's word was law, his commands unquestioned. His subjects regarded him with awe, sometimes even sanctity. He was assisted in ruling the empire by a council of senior officials known as Al-Akbar wa Al-Alam. Serving beside them were the Islamic religious leaders whose role it was to ensure that the empire's actions were in step with Islamic laws. Typically, after receiving a proposed decree from the council officers, the Sultan was required to present the proposed decree to the Grand Mufti for approval. The refusal of the Grand Mufti often led to the reversal of the Sultan's decree. If the Sultan did not comply, the Grand Mufti would make a declaration to the empire that the Sultan was opposing Islam. This would summarily lead to a vote of no confidence in the Sultan and his removal. In this way, the Kanem-Bornu's government blended African traditions of sacred kingship with Islamic political thought, creating a system that was both flexible and durable. Unlike many medieval states in Europe, Kanem-Bornu gave women substantial authority. The Magira, which means Queen Mother, supervised the palace, directed court rituals, and could overrule the Sultan's actions in most cases. During Idris Aluma's youth, Magira Aisha served as regent, personally overseeing state affairs, securing trade routes, and preparing her son to become the empire's greatest general. The Guzma, that is the empress, often the Sultan's first wife, influenced palace policy and wielded real political authority. This female political power ensured continuity and balance, especially during times of transition. With the influence of Islam over the years, this female power in the palace of the Sultan did diminish over time. If administration was the skeleton of Kanem-Bornu, its military was the muscle. Next in line in the administration was the Kaigama, who was responsible for the armies, forces during military campaigns, and reported directly to the Sultan. The military's weapons consisted of lances and swords. The warriors were draped in chain-mail outfits, which protected their bodies and the vital parts of the horses and camels that made up the cavalry. The empire's armies gave it dominance over a vast region and protection against rivals. From its earliest centuries, the May commanded absolute loyalty from warrior nobles and tribes, binding them into an empire-spanning fighting force. By the 13th century, Kanem's armies were already a formidable sight. Ibn Falah al-Umari, an Arab geographer, described them as a disciplined Muslim force capable of fighting with organization and resilience. End quote. But the golden transformation came with Mir Idris Aluma, who ruled from 1571 to 1603. He turned the empire into a military powerhouse, and as one of Africa's great warrior kings, on par with Shaka Zulu or Somari Toure. But unlike them, he reigned 3 centuries before the colonial era. His genius lay in the modernizing of his army while also instilling discipline into a professional force. The empire's military structure relied heavily on a cavalry, which, as stated earlier, consisted of armored horsemen in chainmail and leather, wielding lances and swords. In addition, they perfected the use of camel cavalry. So in addition to horses, the military also used camels, which are ideal for desert war campaigns, thus giving the empire's forces unmatched mobility across the Sahel. It also ensured that the military could go for months without the need for so much water to feed the cavalry, which consisted of camels. As we all know, camels can hold water in their hump for weeks at a time. The empire also built ribats. These are fortified garrisons and military outposts which were strategically stationed throughout Bornu. These forts secured trade routes, protected caravans, and also served as bases for military campaigns. Under Sultan Aluma, the empire cavalry secured muskets and cannons from the Ottoman Empire. Turkish advisors were used to train the soldiers in the use of muskets, making them musketeers, and became a permanent part of Bornu's armies. This was an African state using gunpowder centuries before colonial conquest, not as victims, but as masters of the technology. So muskets existed on the continent of Africa before the coming of Europeans, thanks to the liaison between the empire and the Ottoman Turks. At this point, are gone with the days of loosely organized raiding bands. From the reign of Aluma, discipline was enforced. There were organized supply chains which ensured soldiers were provisioned. Their armies could march long distances without collapsing into disorder, a key reason for their many victories. The empire maintained strong diplomatic ties which it held since the 11th century. The empire sent envoys as far as Tripoli, Cairo, and Istanbul, and relied on intelligence networks, gathering information before military campaigns. This would have been the earliest form of strategic espionage. Under Sultan Idris Aluma, the empire expanded its territories further north and south and secured Bornu's position as the dominant state of Central Africa. The empire subdued rebellious tribes within Bornu, uniting Kanuri, Bulala, and other groups into one empire. Fought successfully against the Hausa states to the west, establishing Bornu influence in northern Nigeria. To the east, the empire projected power towards Darfur and the Nile Valley and secured the northern trade route into Fezzan and Tripoli, thus ensuring Bornu's place in the lucrative Trans-Saharan trade. During Idris Aluma's reign, it is claimed that the empire was so secure that a woman laden with gold could walk from one end of the empire to the other, fearing no one but God. Even after Aluma's death, the military traditions he built endured. Bornu continued to rule the battlefield, adding guns and musketeers to his disciplined formations which lasted well into the 19th century. When Europeans eventually penetrated the Sahel, they encountered not passive tribes, but heirs to a thousand-year-old military tradition. Travelers' entries still describe Bornu's armies as impressive, with thousands of cavalry and well-equipped musketeers. Though colonial technologies of the late 1800s eventually overwhelmed them, forces remind us that Africa was not a land of stateless people awaiting conquest. It was a continent, and still is a continent, of mighty states and seasoned armies. The Kanem-Bornu administration underpinned its military achievements. Sultan Idris Aluma institutionalized justice by establishing the Wadi courts, thus separating judiciary from executive power. His reforms ensured that disputes were settled according to Sharia, reinforcing fairness and religious legitimacy. Trade was another cornerstone. Standardized measures of grain, improved boats for Lake Chad, and cleared roads made Bornu a commercial hub. From salt and horses in the north to coconuts and slaves in the south, Bornu's markets thrived under military protection. Religion too was central. Arabic became the language of administration, while the Maliki school of Islamic law guided governance. Bornu even established schools in Cairo, linking it to the broader Islamic world. Too often, African history is told as though it began with colonization, but Kanem-Bornu proves otherwise. For centuries before Europeans arrived, African states like Bornu mastered firearms, built centralized administrations, commanded vast armies, and maintained complex diplomatic networks. Kanem-Bornu's story disrupts stereotypes. It shows Africa not as a passive recipient of foreign power, but as an active creator of civilization and military innovation. Its rulers were kings and queens who could match their European or Ottoman contemporaries in ambition and statecraft. Kanem-Bornu lasted for over 1,000 years, a millennium of rule, reform, and resilience. It was a state where kings ruled by sacred authority, where councils and scholars enforced justice, where women shaped dynasties, and where generals rode battle with muskets and cavalry long before colonial armies marched into Africa. So next time we think of great empires, we should place Kanem-Bornu alongside Rome, Byzantium, and the Ottomans. For on the shores of Lake Chad, Africa gave the world a millennium kingdom, an empire whose armies thundered across the Sahel, whose rulers built a just and ordered state, and whose legacy reminds us that Africa's story of power, innovation, and military might.